Unmute. Hi, all.
We're here.
Welcome to Generational Change.
And I'm
Thursday live stream. Yeah, back in studio. Yes.
Yeah.
Which allows me to use the chalkboard again, because when it's just me and I'm sitting in the middle, I don't, there's no point.
So I have a new look.
I see that. You're very dapper.
Well,
I was just feeling these earrings tonight a lot, but yeah.
Yeah, Jen decided to dress up a little bit.
I'm just
making herself a little bit more presentable than normal. Yeah, right.
So you want me to start by talking about Dante, right?
I think that, we want to obviously continue to evolve in terms of our format, but I think an opening statement is always a good thing.
I know it's so funny. All right. So, but you know what? I don't know if I want to talk about that or if I want to talk about the end of the Chauvin case, but yeah, I mean,
We've already got one person who's noticed, so that's a good sight. Thank you, Kara. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Everybody hit the like button. Remember, YouTube.
Yes.
Subscribe, share.
So the Dante Wright thing is interesting because I actually do have this feeling that this cop was just a negligent, bumbling.
Yeah, I don't think there was any malintent on this particular case.
I don't. And yet she needed to lose her job and she needs to be, I mean, that is, so like, although people want her to be charged with murder, to make a manslaughter case is a lot more likely with something like that because it was definitely negligent on her part. So that's why that's more fitting. And it's so sad to me that anybody would argue that Dante Wright was so threatening to them. And you know what? The fact that she even felt the need to taser him, like that to me is also just kind of why are our police so fearful?
It's not just that they're fearful; it's the fact that they're so trigger happy, that they're so jumpy. But to me, that shows that they're not calm under pressure. And that to me is one of the hallmarks of being a police officer is that you're really supposed to be able to handle a situation. You are only supposed to discharge your weapon as a last resort, not a first call.
No, they do it to like get people's attention now. It's like, you're not paying attention. I'm just going to shoot you.
Or I'm going to brandish it and try to scare you.
Well, all of this is it's absurd at this point. And it almost makes me want to just go into bootlickers just because it's sort of related, but I don't know like what you wanted to.
No, we do our thing. I think going into bootlickers.
I mean, only because, acceptable. And it's unfortunate that all of these things are happening in the Midwest. There's a lot of good people in the Midwest. I certainly love the area that we're talking about, but there is definitely some issues. So this is.
I still think as much as anything, there's still the financial ramifications of why they are allowed to get away with this. That, more than anything else, is the biggest reason why we have the problems that we have.
Well, these three, Larry, Moe, and Curly here, I'm just floored that the young officer that shot Jacob Blake 7 times in the back is back at work. Like, I mean, this is just, these three are just, they're pretty low as far as I'm concerned. I'm not grasping what's going on. Maybe their pool of candidates in Kenosha County is really small. I don't know.
They sure have quite a look to them. That's for sure.
Yeah. These three, well, seriously, they look like the Three Stooges.
Well,
so you've got Kenosha County Sheriff. You got the chief of police and you've got the county DA.
I wonder if they're going to say that these guys are having a bad day.
Oh,
because that seems to be the hallmark of what often happens.
Now, in all reality, what's going to happen is that Jacob Blake's civil suit will be successful to some extent, even though a criminal case isn't. And he is suing the county, as well he should. And unfortunately, the people of Kenosha County are going to pick up the tab for it. And it's sad, like that's.
Which again leads to the biggest part of how we deal with police reform in the United States. Everyone is looking for that silver bullet, if you will. But to me, the best thing you got to hit them financially. And ending qualified immunity is how you'll get them in line. And it's not a question of getting one in line. It's a question of getting the heads of the obviously the police unions, that's the biggest impediment, but getting the head of all of the sheriff's departments throughout the United States and all of the counties to basically say, we are not protecting our bad apples anymore.
Wow.
And there would probably even be clauses within the ending qualified immunity that would basically say, this whole, we don't ask questions or we don't actually come out against our own. I do think that that's going to be the bigger component here. But the biggest problem, especially with any type of non-corporate movement in the United States, is people get way too caught up with 1,000 different ideas, trying to splice them all together as one. When you hone in on one specific idea and most people universally support it, that's your best shot.
No, we definitely need to be ending qualified immunity.
You're not abolishing police. So get that out of your head. That ain't happening. But you have to figure out a way to change this narrative. If you want to get the 2/3 majority of the nation behind you on a specific issue, ending qualified immunity in crystal clear language is the easiest way you're going to get there. And I do think there's a shot to make it happen. I do.
Yeah, well, look, we've got 2 states now that have done it. So that at least makes it something within the realm of possibility. Granted, Florida will likely be last. Jeffrey Ginter, very happy to see you. You are one of my favorite people to follow.
And that's probably a very true statement in many respects, if you think about it. It's basically saying that, think of it this way. There was an expose that was done, I want to say on like Vice Media. This was maybe like 6-7 years ago, where they showed the recruitment of the white nationalists into the police departments throughout the country. Now, obviously, this is in more rural America. They would pick, these guys would be a lot easier to spot in like big city, suburban areas. But, in the places where they were able to ultimately figure out a way to get them into these police departments, they have the tattoos on their arms and things like that.
Wow.
Those systemic problems actually do exist. Now, how systemic it is, I can't say.
Well, no, and I think it's in a chicken and an egg problem too. And I've talked about this before. I think when you're offering work that is, that's so sweet. When you're offering work that is militarized work, essentially, and you're offering commando weaponry and all this stuff, you are going to attract a certain type of person into that career. So we have created a policing career that is much more patrol dominant than investigative dominant. And that is a problem. And you're getting certain people in it. Like, we need people with problem solving, investigative minds to get into law enforcement that want to solve crimes, not big bullies that want to arm up and go patrol the world. So there's definitely a difference in those people. So I do think it's like you want to give people weapons, they're going to want to use them. I mean, and they're going to want to use all their big fancy weapons.
Then you get to an even more interesting component of law enforcement, which is they end up bringing in a lot of people who are ex-military, ex-combat veterans. And in a country that doesn't have universal health care, which in many cases does not deal with mental health crises that exist for ex-military.
You have PTSD out the yin-yang, probably.
So you're literally putting them on a police force. And could you even imagine how easy it must be to put ex-military in police departments where they basically, listen, I'm not saying they're giving them a cakewalk to get the badge and the gun, but I am guessing that there is a sense of respect for those who actually served in combat and basically don't want to make it difficult on them to have a new career. Because for a lot of them, having that career post military is not as easy as people think. If anybody has ever seen the movie The Hurt Locker, I would highly recommend it, because the real message behind that movie is showing how there are people who are so affected by serving in combat that they can never properly adjust to civilian life again. And that's why a lot of them do end up going back into the military and to serve in combat. So that's also
our jobs program.
Well, that's also probably one of the allures, if you think about it, to becoming a law enforcement officer. And I'm not saying that they're all like this. The reality is that most police officers overall are not doing the things that we see on camera. But what we do know is that there is a culture, there is a culture problem, there is a code of silence problem. This exists on Capitol Hill, if you think about it. We put out the tweet earlier today about the fact that there is such a silver lining, not a silver lining, but there's so many direct parallels between what actually goes on in law enforcement and what goes on Capitol Hill. There are good apples who never, ever stand up to the bad apples. There's always this protection of the institution that comes first. And that is what has to change. The good officers in the field who know who the bad officers are, they know who they are. Like, I have no doubt that Officer Gutierrez, who pulled what he pulled on Lieutenant Nazario last week in Windsor, Virginia, I guarantee you the guy's got a rap sheet out his rear end. That's not the first time.
But clearly just very trigger happy, nervous, overly threatened, skittish people maybe should not have weapons.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe people that can't distinguish between a gun and a taser when frightened shouldn't be carrying a gun and a taser. And I'm just throwing that out there.
And again, if you watch the video of what happened with Dwayne Wright, it happened so fast. It happened in a matter of seconds. And the fact that you're reacting in such a way, and it's not like she was alone. There were 4 other officers on the scene. I still am
not sure why she was pulling out her taser. He got pulled over for air fresheners. It's ludicrous. This is ludicrous. And that she felt so threatened that she panicked and couldn't I don't care. First of all, okay, if you can't tell the difference between a taser and a gun in your hands, you should have neither of those things.
Yep.
Okay. And I don't care how stressed out you are. And if someone like that causes you so much angst and stress when you have other officers around you, you really ought not be in law enforcement. So, I do think there's a case against her for this, for sure.
No, absolutely.
And, kudos to them for, she stepped down, but they would have fired her. I believe that. I mean, she probably went about it in whatever was the best way to receive any sort of dignity or pension that you possibly can, I guess, whatever the rules are.
And so, again, not defending the actions. I'm just simply saying that if anybody knows anyone who's ever been a police officer or any, worked in any type of hierarchical structure, it's very difficult when you don't have any wind at your back to try to protect you from the ramifications that come. Remember, for most people, this is their livelihood, and they know that it could be tossed out like that. And that's how the capitalist system stays in place in the current manifestation that it is, because most people are fearful of any type of reprisal. It's one of the greatest indictments on why the Bessemer, Alabama union, Amazon warehouse workers did not unionize. Now, of course, I have no doubt we don't even know the extent of the type of brutal tactics that Amazon had employed to prevent them from doing it.
He was in bed with the local police, the sheriff's office. I am sure they were scaring and intimidating those people like it was nobody's business. There was no way that was a fair election. And I would never have expected it to be. So, it's just, and we still need to keep chipping away, and they still need to keep chipping away. And next time you'll get more and more, but I have no doubt that this wasn't remotely fair and that there was serious intimidation happening to the people in that town.
I do think that this is not going to be the end of it. I do think that this is the start. I do think that there is somewhat of a citizens' uprising happening in this country right now. And before we jump into news and amuse, I just want to make my statement.
You have a statement.
We have opening statements.
This is opening statements?
Yes. I'm obviously very happy that President Biden has come out and said that he wants to pull us out of Afghanistan. And that, of course, is something that's long overdue. We don't need to elaborate any further as to why that is obviously essential. This is in this. This is part of it?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
So then I guess news and amuse is going to correlate with what we're talking about now.
Well, that's what I wasn't sure if you were understanding. And
I understand.
So, but if you want to have a nice little, personal moment about Joe Biden and the idea of us leaving Afghanistan, which I just don't even think is going to happen anyway.
No, and again, I understand that a lot of people are very hesitant to even think that it's possible. I think that there are a number of components there's definitely a number of components to what Biden has said already that would lead you to believe that he may very well be serious about this. But ultimately, you're saying we're not pulling out of there for another 5 months. Who knows what could happen over the next 5 months?
That's not even the more blatant problem, which is you don't get to simultaneously be talking about removing troops from Afghanistan and asking for an increase in the military budget.
Correct.
Those two things are what I call oxymoronic.
If you're going to remove troops from one
emphasis on moron.
Well, if you're going to be removing troops from one nation and systemically putting them into another, so what does that get us?
No, and even if it's not troops, even if we just reduce our troops, but we increase our drone program or whatever it is, adding money to our military budget is I don't even know if there's a word for this. It's beyond absurd. Like, it's just so offensive and disgusting at this point. And so to do that, but then say you're going to get out of Afghanistan, yeah, that doesn't really do it for me, Joe. Not to mention, one, I don't believe you. And two, you'll make it be, oh, well, we got to do it this way. Man. And it's a slow process, which it shouldn't be.
But
it shouldn't be.
You know the thing.
And I'll refer, the thing. And I'll refer to Bo, who talked about this either today or yesterday.
Bo of the fifth column. You know, you talk about Bo like everyone knows.
Everyone should know who Bo is. Well, if they watch me, they'll start to know. So explaining based on the number of troops that are there, that pulling out of there is not something that's a big production. It just isn't. So if they're going to say that it's a big production, they're lying, and there's something else going on, which of course there's something else going on.
Our producer John brings up a very good point.
He often
does. Not to mention the border wall. Well, Joe Biden did say that he is planning on finishing the border wall, and it's amazing how the neoliberal class, Washington Post, New York Times, are all like okay with it.
No, they're just not mentioning. Well, it's sort of like the same thing as.
We started it, so I guess we got to finish it. But Joe's not a racist. Trump is. Remember that.
And we're still not going to talk about the fact that it's just physically not possible in many locations.
That is true, especially with the Rio Grande. That's one of the biggest issues.
That and just the fact that in a lot of places it's private property, in some places it's public property. It's a train wreck of a problem, which was why this was ridiculous in the first place, among the fact that it's xenophobic, nationalistic, and unnecessary.
But you have to remember that I have no doubt that part of the military budget increase is to deal with the wall. Like, that's where the billions upon billions of dollars is likely going, if you think about it.
See, again, this is more examples of policies and things that are not based on reason and science. They're just not. That's not based on reason. A wall protects us from nothing. Nothing.
Policy is what protects us.
The majority of people that are in this country illegally came here legally in the first place. So the fact that you think that if we spent the money that's putting on this wall and put it into our education system, or better yet, why don't we build some affordable housing for those people at the border, and instead of keeping them in cages, we put them in nice condos? I don't know, but I'd rather spend that money on anything but that stupid wall.
Well, again, we could end the war on drugs, and that would probably curtail a migrant crisis infinitely more so than a border wall.
Except for now, we're talking about an administration that just fired staff members for disclosing prior cannabis usage that was legal. So you know what, Joe? And here's the other thing. You know why we're in Afghanistan?
Yes.
We're in Afghanistan because of the poppies.
Opium fields, baby.
So we are into the poppies. And I got no problem with the poppies, but the people of Afghanistan need to decide what to be doing with their own poppies and profiting and doing whatever they want to do with their poppies. And it's not our business.
No.
That's my problem. They want to sell their poppies and we want to buy them and we want to create drugs and we want to legalize it. Yay us. But this is not our problem. So the fact that somebody who is so anti-cannabis is still participating in this nonsense, because we ultimately know that they're profiting off of the drug war. It's just,
And
oxymoronic.
Again, we are not going to have a solution to this problem because, unfortunately, and this is something we'll talk about with Wendell Potter when he comes on, corporate special interest money is why we can't have nice things. Corporate special interest is what dominates Capitol Hill. The trillions of dollars that's unaccountable by the Pentagon, the fact that there's like two separate military budgets. There's the ones that's discretionary spending, and then there's just ones that goes to the Pentagon to do whatever the hell it is they do.
They have so much unaccountable spending and lost money. It's just...
Look, remember the day before 9/11, you had Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld speaking to, I want to say it was...
He's evil.
Oh, he is. But he was speaking to, I think he was on the Senate floor, if I'm not mistaken, talking about how the Pentagon has over $2 trillion in unaccounted money. Today, I think it's over $10 trillion. So, again,
how are you going to pay for that?
How are you going to pay for it? Yeah. How the hell are you going to have universal health care?
Let's ask
you can't
the
have it. Pentagon's got the money. That's what hey, let's get all the unaccounted money from the Pentagon and we could cover Medicare for all for
well,
at least a decade.
And I still say that all the money that we should be taking out of patrolling type of law enforcement and give it to the firefighters and the teachers.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's a good, because the firefighters need more money in their pensions and we're trying to take their money.
So do the paramedics.
Yeah, well, yeah, but that's when I'm talking about they're included, they're under.
It's one and the same.
They're under the same banner as far as their labor, their union, they're negotiating. So that's what I'm speaking
And
of.
so what's a good segue into a second story of our news and amuse, of course, is Pramila Jayapal. Listen, we think the world of her. She does a great job. But the problem is that a lot of people are getting tired of the words not turning into action. And that's a good point, because we're obviously big supporters of Whole Washington, which is the single-payer healthcare initiative in Washington State. Representative Jayapal has not even acknowledged this movement, yet alone support it. And that's disturbing, because that should not be the case. If you really want to see single-payer healthcare come to play, then you have to exert your influence. Now, if your argument for not exerting influence at the state level is because you know that your governor, Jay Inslee, is not going to sign that bill into law, then it just goes to show you that this culture of silence to protect the institution, much like in policing, is why this is a significant problem. Now, to Jayapal's credit, she has come out and said, no, Joe, I don't agree with you on increasing the military budget. I think we need to reduce the budget. Well, yes, of course, we need to reduce the budget.
I thought that's why we were talking about Pramila Jayapal, but you're saying that the fact that she is the lead sponsor of Medicare for all, but yet she doesn't sponsor it at her state level. This is what you're talking about. Support it rather at her state level.
And the point of that is that it speaks to a greater issue here, because she is the chair of the Progressive Caucus. So if you really want to see the military budget reduced, which it should be by hundreds of billions of dollars a year, what are you prepared to do? You can't just say that you want this to happen. What are you prepared to do? Are you prepared to hold up a bill?
They're getting to where they have the numbers to be able to do things.
No, they do. They do.
Like the Democrats would not have a majority if not for the progressive bloc. So the progressive bloc can actually, play chicken with them. And they don't. Are they willing to do that? No, apparently not. Look, empirical evidence shows clearly not. But now, speaking of unions, we're never going to be able to get away from the police story, because it encompasses a lot of different things. And so when I talk about the code of silence, which is a very big part of this problem, the code of silence ultimately moves not just to what happens when you have bad officers in the field. You also have bad officers doing extremely nefarious things. Now, again, reference to a movie. I think it was a book too. I believe it was. Academy Award-winning film, really great film, Spotlight. That's about the church. Yeah. Oh, okay. If you haven't seen Spotlight, I highly recommend that you take a look at it, because it is about the Catholic Church scandal in Boston that took place, I want to say in the 90s, I think it was. And well, look, this is something that's been going on for a really long time. That was the first time that anybody ever really went with the story. Well, listen, the Archdiocese is one of the most powerful entities on the planet by far. And so when the Boston Archdiocese was basically under fire because they did have priests that were sexually molesting young boys and getting away with it, well, guess who was essentially protecting them from not being prosecuted? Was the Boston Police Department. Yes. And so they're lockstep in with the diocese. That's for sure. So as it turns out, and again, it gets back to the whole issue of the code of silence in the top-down capitalist system that we have, you have the union president of the Boston Police has been molesting young boys since 1995. Oh, nice. And it has been being covered up, because there's no way you're doing something that long without people knowing. And is it ironic in any way, shape, or form that this directly crosses over into the same timeline as to what actually happened with the Catholic Church? No, of course not. They were working hand in hand. The police department was covering for the church, and the church was facilitating, allowing police pederasses to just get whatever they want. As much as I think that there's a really good chance that Matt Gaetz is going to go down for trafficking, because he technically did commit that offense if in fact he did have relations with this woman, even if it was consensual, because there is no consensual. Okay. But again, he took her across state lines. And if that is true,
and she is underage, then that is trafficking, and that is absolutely a federal offense, and he could actually go to prison for the rest of his life. That's how serious this is. The problem is, how many people in government have this kind of dirt under their fingernails? Whether it's them, whether it's a family member, a friend, whoever it is that they are protecting. And the truth of the matter is, it's all about that code of silence. If I'm going down, you're coming with me.
Well,
I'm not going alone.
I think this is why the people that are in power and you've been saying this a long time, and you've been saying it specifically about our local
well, I've always been very clear that the biggest reason why Wasserman Schultz is still in Congress more than any other reason, not just because she takes all the corporate money and has a lot of people under her thumb, as much as any reason she's still in Congress, she was the head of the party for 6 years. She was the chair of the DNC for 6 years. She knows everybody's dirty laundry, everybody's, especially the ones who are under the corporate dollar. So what does that mean? That means that Debbie has essentially put out the word that if I go, I'm taking every one of you with me. That's why no one, and I mean no one around here stands up to her.
No one will cross her.
Nobody.
And I do think a lot of it has to do with, when you hear things like what's going on with Matt Gaetz, and it's people are acting like they're clutching their pearls and they're so appalled. If that gets publicized, then that means it's happening a lot of different times amongst a lot of different people where it's not being publicized. So that's just a common thing. So yeah, imagine the dirt that exists on a lot of people.
Oh,
so right. It's just, you can't clean up after yourself fast enough.
Just how bad it can ultimately get. And that to me is more than any other reason why this is such a hot button issue, because we don't know. We don't know how far the depths of this goes, but what we do know is that this culture exists in a lot of different places. It's very visible right now in law enforcement, just because of everything happening. The fact that there's been a second slaying in the same city as the most hot button trial we have seen in quite some time, especially with law enforcement. You never see anything like this.
I feel bad for the people of Minnesota and this region. Sure. I really do, because this is all coming out of their wallets.
Oh, yes. And again, it comes full circle as to what needs to happen here. You need to end qualified immunity. This is what can unite the entire country. If you say abolish police, you will lose, and you'll lose badly. And we don't want to lose. We want to start taking power.
We're winners. We want to win.
Yeah, I want to win. I want to win because I want us to progress. We don't need to continue to deal with people who are impeding progress. So you have to get people to check their egos at the door. But a lot of people don't want to check their egos at the door. People are viscerally reacting to the way things are going, but then you never actually get anywhere. And on top of that, you still have to deal with dishonest actors. You still have to deal with people who are going to say hyperbolic things, because in reality, they don't want it to change. They want things to stay exactly the same. And if they come off as being a little too crazy, the moderates, if you will, are going to think, well, now we definitely do not want to give them the benefit of the doubt, and we definitely don't want them involved in this capacity. So that in itself is why we really need to think long and hard about how we message things and how we attack them going forward. Because if you don't have a good point of attack, then what's the point?
Well, this is why I think a lot of times the left is not successful, and they just can't seem to get out of their own way. So
when you bite off more than you can chew, when you attempt to do things that have no firm standing and you do not recognize where other people are, trust me, most people do not have any love for the corporate special interest money that is in politics. But it all depends on how you present it to them. If you come at them with this idea that everyone is an enemy, it's not going to work. You can't just assume that everyone who is in law enforcement is a bad person, but the culture of silence is what makes them complicit in what goes on.
Same as you can't assume that all priests are child molesters, but there is definitely a culture of silence and complicity.
Now, I am not suggesting that defunding the police. I think it's demilitarizing the police is the proper terminology.
Yeah, but people want to hear that the money is not going to be going there.
That is correct.
And the money ought not be going there. And I understand what they're saying. I just think that arguing about the semantics of it is not as important as addressing the policies. So we need to be fighting for, to end qualified immunity. We need to be fighting for specific policies that are feasible, that are being done, that are more tangible. And saying defund the police, while catchy, is very amorphous And it leaves way too much up to discretion. It's not actual policy. It's nothing that you're going to install. It's nothing that's going to be universal. So it's just not as productive as coming up with actual policies. But yeah, I would like to see a lot of money taken away from policing and given to the firefighters and the teachers.
And I think that that is a lot more reasonable than just saying, you know, let's defund the police. I think if you were to say reallocate police funding and give it to the firefighters and paramedics, I think that there would be a lot more receptiveness to that rather than people just saying, I hate the police, take their money away.
Well, they're starting to kind of really earn that. I got to tell you.
Yeah.
Like every day that goes on, it's like I feel like they're digging themselves deeper and deeper. They're making it easier and easier for things like qualified immunity.
Hunter, can you please behave yourself for just one day, please? Thank you very much.
I think that these officers, though, are facilitating legislation that will eventually end qualified immunity more across the board, because these types of actions are only going to instigate those kinds of policies. So, you know, that's going to help our situation.
Well, again, our situation will only be helped if we learn how to put our differences aside, go along to get along. Because a lot of people don't want to do that. They want to have what they want their say. They want to be able to wax poetic in many instances. And we see that around here as well. You know, a lot of movements, you know, they never end up taking off because I don't want to say it's like a purity test, but it's one of those, it's our way or no way.
Yeah.
And there is no room for negotiation. There is no room for identifying that there are different people along different sects. But let's remember, there are primary issues that we can really attack. And of course, one of those issues, which we're going to attack now head on, is the issue of universal health care in the United States. This is...
So we're getting into where our guest is going to be coming on. So
yes.
Our change maker. And, you know, I'm a big fan of whistleblowers. So this is really good. So this is somebody, Wendell Potter is somebody who was an executive in the insurance industry and had a moment of consciousness, realized that that's not necessarily what's in the best interest of our country, and is a health reform advocate and a best-selling author. And this is somebody who has been speaking truth to power and really talking about what goes on behind the scenes in insurance companies. Now, as somebody who's an attorney, like I've known, like not so surprising to me, like I know people who are paid to find reasons to deny claims. Like that's their whole job. Their sole existence is to deny claims. Like, so, you know, a lot of that is not surprising to us, but I am always glad to see somebody that's willing to stand up for what's right.
Well, I think with that said, you know, Wendell Potter, one of the reasons I also was really looking forward to having him on is that my father actually worked for Cigna earlier in his career. Wasn't there very long, but was a part of the company. And recognizing just how detrimental private insurance and big pharma is to our country is something that I don't really think people fully grasp in terms of impeding progress. But we're going to have Wendell come on and speak on this topic because he knows a lot more than we do. He knows the ins and outs of what one of the most powerful private insurance companies in the country is capable of doing to get their way, and how we're ultimately going to be able to be successful in combating that. So without further ado, Mr. Potter, good evening, sir.
Good evening. How are you guys?
Good to meet you. How are you?
Doing very well. Thank you for coming on. And
my pleasure.
Yeah, your reputation precedes you. And obviously, Jen, you've said many times before, you know, universal healthcare is the issue of our time.
Oh, yeah.
It's definitely the one that would have the most impact on everybody's lives if we were able to get it. So,
and we know what's standing in our way. Like we know this in theory, but to have somebody who's been on the other side and has participated in the brainwashing that has gone on in this country for years as to why we can't have nice things, it is really important, I think, crucial for people to come from that side of it like you have and explain what that really looks like and how the industry is such a barrier to progress.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be a part of the show. I really appreciate that. And yeah, I spent 20 years inside the beast, and I rose up through the ranks to lead the corporate communications function at Cigna, and before that, worked at Humana for a few years. So I know how these companies operate. They're enormously profitable. They've grown far bigger than they were just 10 years ago. Since the Affordable Care Act was passed, they can't do some of the things they used to do to fatten their bottom line. but they've found other ways to enrich themselves and their shareholders. And just today, for example, United Healthcare, which is the largest health insurer, reported profits for the first 3 months of this year that blew Wall Street's expectations out of the water. Their profits were up 44% over the same period last year. And last year was their most profitable year in history. And they weren't alone. So these companies are making obscene amounts of money. And they're taking a lot of the money that we pay in premiums to fund propaganda campaigns.
And what does that look like? Because I don't even, obviously the majority of people, they get up, they put on CNN or MSNBC or Fox, and they think they're, learning things. And they're really being filled with messaging that is very part of our establishment narrative. It isn't like necessarily an advertisement. It's really ingrained in our narrative. And so can you explain like what kinds of things you would be talking about and the message you were wanting to get out to combat? I mean, I was just reading a little bit about what you had said from, again, with Michael Moore's movie and what was going on in the background. But what kind of messaging are you trying in that industry to put out to sort of scare people away from what we know would be our best interest?
Well, first of all, you spend, and they have spent decades on propaganda campaigns to make people think that insurance companies are necessary and to get them to fear any kind of change that might have a detrimental effect on their bottom lines. The part of this, by the way, is efforts to get people to fear their own government, to dislike or have less trust in the government. That's part of what they do. And its background, we don't really know where this is coming from, but know that a lot of it is done behind the scenes. And they fund front groups. And that's a big part of the way that they operate. There's an organization that's based in DC that's run out of a big PR shop. And the front group is called the Partnership for America's Healthcare Future. And that is the current front group to try to scare people against any kind of progressive reform, whether it's in Washington or the state capitals. There are a number of states that this year are trying to pass legislation to create a state-based public option. And this partnership has affiliate groups at the state level that's doing the dirty work of lying to people. They raise fear. In fact, all these campaigns are based on something I call fear, uncertainty, and doubt. It's not my acronym, FUD, but that's what it's based on. FUD stands for fear, uncertainty, and doubt. They want you to fear change. They want you to feel uncertain about it and to doubt that those who are proposing reform are on your side. They will try to make you think that your taxes will go up. And obscuring, for example, if Medicare for all were to be enacted, we would all pay far less for our health care than we currently do. It's publicly financed, so yes, it's financed through tax dollars, but we would not pay premiums, which go up every single year, nor would we have to pay a lot of money out of our own pockets. They obscure that. So part of it is dealing in lies and half-truths and obscuring important information. They try to make you think that jobs will disappear if change is enacted. So it's all based on fear-mongering. They're fear-mongering campaigns, and they are financed with our money. They skim money that we pay in premiums to fund these campaigns.
Yeah.
We're speaking with Wendell Potter, author, former executive at Cigna, and now a noted whistleblower. Wendell, I think it's very important for people to understand what actually goes on inside the halls of Capitol Hill. Nobody lobbies our representatives more than private insurance and big pharma. If you could speak to what that experience is like, just knowing what happens to, let's say a representative in, whether a safe district or a swing district, and is approached, basically by any representative, whether it be Humana, Cigna, United, and so on, and being asked, are you going to support this initiative? Because, we don't need anybody supporting a universal healthcare initiative. So how does that go down? What would that type of experience look like if we were to, role play, let's say?
Well, often it's through intimidation. On the other hand, they spend a lot of time developing relationships with staff members and with members themselves. And they contribute a lot of money to their campaigns, Democrats as well as Republicans. And that's how they get their claws into a lot of these politicians. They come to expect and count on these campaign contributions, and they're significant. You can look on at places like online at Open Secrets.
Open Secrets. Oh, yes.
And you can see just how much money these companies and this industry is plowing into these campaigns. When I was at Cigna, one of the things that I did was manage the Political Action Committee, and we would often make sure that we gave as much money to Democrats as to Republicans. They can pretty much count on Republicans carrying their water. There's never very much concern there, but they still. To keep that going, contribute a lot to Republicans, but they also contribute a lot to Democrats. And the Democratic establishment has grown used to this, and they don't want that money to dry up. So this money that they give in campaign contributions buys you access. If you're a lobbyist for one of these big companies, you can be certain that you will have a chance to talk to staff, and in many cases, the members themselves. They will host receptions and raise money behind the scenes. If you go on Capitol Hill, you'll see nearby there are a lot of row houses that look like people live in them. They're at one point people did live in them, but now they're owned by lobbying firms or corporations.
So you're talking about those beautiful brownstones across from the Capitol are not actually residences. Those are more like where you show up to have tea and crumpets and try to wine and dine you. Okay, so yeah, that makes sense.
That's exactly right. And you can go on Capitol Hill, and almost at any time during the day, you'll see, at least between votes and committee hearings, members trickle out of the Capitol going into these townhouses because these lobbyists stage quiet fundraisers for them. So it's an enormous exchange of money that buys influence, buys relationships. And that is why it is so hard to move forward. The lobbying is intense. People don't have anywhere close to the amount of money, when I say people, regular folks, that these industries have. And during the debate on what became the Affordable Care Act, you mentioned the drug industry. They actually spent more money than insurance companies. The pharmaceutical industry spent more money during that debate than any industry had ever spent in a single year on a single bill in history. The insurance industry was right behind them. So enormous amounts of money was spent. And we know that, for example, that this is another way how it works. The original legislation contained a provision to create a public option. You may remember that. Yeah. But the industry knew that they could stop it in the Senate with just one vote. And they went to Joe Lieberman, who is from Connecticut, the insurance capital of the world, and they got him to oppose it. And he opposed it and said, I will not vote for this bill if the public option is in it. So that's how politics works.
Yeah.
I do think it's also very important to note, because as you know, the Democratic establishment, but especially the moderate liberals who live in the suburbs, they look at Obama like a lot of conservatives look at Reagan, like he's a saint, and you can't criticize him. What actually, from your perspective, did happen back in 2009 when, obviously Obama campaigned very hard on getting the public option into whatever potential healthcare bill we were going to have. And then once push came to shove, it ultimately was thrown out. Now, everyone wants to point the finger at Joe Lieberman. We all know that's a crock of it. That's not what really happened. That's what the media will let you know is what happened. But in terms of, what actually happened behind the scenes, from your perspective, why did, at that particular time, the public option ultimately not make it into the bill? And is there any reason to believe that something like that might happen anytime soon?
Yeah, to be honest with you, I'm skeptical that it will happen anytime soon. For the same reasons that it didn't happen 12 years ago or 11 years ago. The industry was able to communicate directly and many times with the Obama administration, with people who were in the White House, who were responsible for different aspects of handling the relationship with Congress during that debate. And you had people like Rahm Emanuel, who was quite eager to begin to cut deals. And the way it works is you have pharmaceutical companies and drug and insurance companies say, and the way they intimidate, the way they threaten is that if we don't like what you guys are going to be proposing, know that we will spend enormous sums of money to turn public opinion away from reform. So it's essentially blackmail. And all too often, politicians and presidents in the White House who you think would be liberal and progressive cave because they just are not willing to stand up to these incredibly powerful special interests.
How much did Bernie Sanders change the narrative in this country over the last 5 years, from your perspective? Because his top issue, without question, is Medicare for all.
Incredible difference. You may recall that during the 2009 and 2010, during the debate on what became the Obamacare Act, there was no consideration given to Medicare for all at all. There was plenty of support for it, but members of Congress were not at all willing to even have a hearing on single-payer health care. In fact, some advocates were actually thrown out of a Senate hearing and put in jail for protesting and justifiably so, because they were given no consideration.
I wonder if our friend Medea Benjamin was one of those people. It wouldn't surprise us.
You know.
I don't know if you're familiar with Medea Benjamin. She's an amazing anti-war advocate.
Of course he knows.
But she's definitely somebody who would advocate for universal health care. And we're proud to say that she's down here in Miami. About Florida. Yeah.
But back to your question, because of Bernie Sanders and his years of advocacy, and by running for president, he changed the narrative. We would not have Pramila Jayapal, you mentioned her earlier, the support that she has been able to get for her legislation. More than half of the Democratic caucus have signed on as co-sponsors. It has he made a huge difference, and he made sure that healthcare was a major campaign topic, and I can't give him enough credit for the work that he has done and continues to do. And as chair of the budget committee, he wields now an enormous amount of influence, more than ever, in the Senate.
I do think that there's two possibilities going forward. I'm not sure which is going to be the most successful. I do think that what we are seeing, I would assume you're familiar with Whole Washington, their attempt to push forward a statewide healthcare initiative. Because like you said, it's going to be very hard on Capitol Hill to really get this done. But I do think in maybe some of the more less entrenched states, like if you're attempting to do single payer healthcare in a state like Florida, a state like Texas, it's obviously, it's a losing battle, if you will. But I do think if you attempt to do it in states with the right population and the right amount of progressives and moderates compared to, Dixiecrat-like Democrats and obviously hardened conservatives who preach austerity, I do think we're getting close to the point where maybe something like a statewide initiative would be where we would break through. It's ultimately where cannabis was able to break through. I think that's probably what will ultimately happen with healthcare.
I think it'll be the same states.
Probably so.
I think it very likely could as well, too. The West Coast may lead the way, or it could be New York. It could be some of the other states. I absolutely support the efforts in Washington. And I know that there are a lot of Medicare for all or single payer supporters in California and Oregon and Washington. I've testified at legislative hearings in New York, and there is serious consideration being given to legislation. It doesn't get as much coverage, but New York State there's a lot of support for enacting a single payer system. And as you undoubtedly know, that's how it started in Canada. Now, back in the 60s, the movement began in Saskatchewan. Yeah. Tommy Douglas was the premier of the province, and was unrelenting in his support, and was able to get essentially a single payer system enacted in Saskatchewan. The other provinces began to pay attention and seeing what was happening there, and ultimately became a national policy. It's there are differences from province to province, but That's how it happened in Canada, and I think it very possibly could happen that way in this country.
I also think this is one of the reasons why Jen and I, we're not what you would call ardent defenders of AOC. I mean, obviously she's, a really noted trailblazer. She's definitely, probably the most recognizable representative in the Democratic Party outside of Nancy Pelosi. She's certainly done quite a job, not just because of the fact that she has preached these issues, even if you think that she's being a little too friendly with the insiders these days. But I think what she has started in the state of New York cannot be understated. What she did to unseat Joe Crowley and the ripple effect that that has caused within the city, whether it's Jamal Bowman, Mondaire Jones, now you're looking at the people who are running in a variety of different races, whether for federal, for state legislature. And then, of course, of Ron Kim, who's been doing an amazing job in the state Senate and has, charged like a bull in a china shop against somebody like Andrew Cuomo, who we all know would never in a million years, sign a bill for single payer health care in the state of New York.
Shocking.
But perhaps the next governor who would take over and would have that progressive lean, which I do think is very likely to happen. That is where you can really see, I believe, in my opinion, where AOC's true value has really taken shape over the last few years. How do you feel about that?
I agree with that. I absolutely agree with that. She's had an enormous influence, and nationally as well as obviously in New York. I think you're absolutely right. By the way, I before she defeated Crowley, I wrote a piece, I think just the day before, when certainly was not a foregone conclusion that she was going to win by any means. I looked at the campaign contributions that the Democrats were taking from the political action committees of the big insurance companies, and Crowley was right at the top. He was one of the insurance industry's favorites, even though he was so-called progressive. The insurance industry, every single one of the big for-profits, the political action committees gave money to Crowley. So that just gives you an understanding of how the insurance industry operates. And it was just extraordinary that she was able to defeat him without any PAC money, without any corporate money at all.
That is where, I think a lot of people really, if there's one area where I think a lot of people rightfully so, direct their ire at AOC, and it is validated, is whether or not she's actually doing enough to try to bring up new candidates. One thing we always try to do is pay it forward and give as much attention to anybody who's running on a non-corporate platform. I mean, to me, the biggest impediment to any type of success, period, is corporate special interest money. I don't care what your ideology is. 9 times out of 10, if you sit somebody down who could be as libertarian right as it gets and as progressive left as it gets, you can actually have them in a conversation about primary issues. We're not talking wedge issues here. We're talking the primary issues like healthcare, the environment, living wage, and so on. I guarantee you most people will agree on these things. And I think that the best way to essentially sell single-payer healthcare to the United States is to say, we do not need for-profit middlemen in between us and our doctor. There is no reason for it to exist. They bring absolutely no value to the table whatsoever. It is the fact that we have a runaway capitalist system that feels that they can profit off anything.
It's predatory, but can you explain, because there is this sort of idea that there will be job loss. Now, this is one of those things where I look at it, and even if there is job loss, I'm like, well, that's unfortunate, but they need to find other jobs in a different industry. But I think that is, like you said, has been so grossly exaggerated as to what would really be the impact on humans. And clearly the advantage outweighs that. I mean, people having healthcare is infinitely more important than some people having to find new jobs. So it clearly weighs it. But what do you tell people that are like in your old position? Like if you were explaining to the people that are they're, look, they're sitting pretty and making lots and lots of money. So it's like, how do you explain that this is really what's better for our country?
A number of things here. One is that the impact is absolutely exaggerated. If we have a single payer system, if we had Medicare for all, these big companies will not just dry up and go away. They have a lot of divisions that operate outside of health insurance. United, which I mentioned earlier, for example, has a very big and growing and very profitable division called Optum. It doesn't sell health insurance. It does a lot of other things, but not health insurance. Those jobs would not go away necessarily. The other thing is that these companies have been laying people off and offshoring a lot of these jobs over many years. A lot of the claims processing is done overseas. A lot of even the customer service jobs have been offshored and outsourced to companies abroad. So these companies have no allegiance whatsoever to their employees. I've seen, and I had to when I was in the industry myself, have to lay employees off because I had no, it was a directive to do that. But it's important to know, Jen, as you said earlier too, that a lot of these jobs are there to deny coverage, to deny care to people. There's actually a job description. You can look it up. It's called denial nurse. And the industry has hired armies of nurses. One of the reasons we have a nurse shortage is because so many of them have been hired by insurance companies. And what they do day in and day out in many cases is say, give doctors and their staffs a hard time and becoming a stumbling block for people to get the care that they need. They've hired a lot of doctors as well too. It may surprise you that United Healthcare is the largest employer of doctors in this country. They now have about 50,000 doctors, and said earlier this year they're going to hire another 10,000. They hire them directly, or they buy physician practices. So that's what's been going on. You could have a lot of these people, and I tell folks this, a lot of those employees are clinically trained as caregivers. Let those folks go back into providing care instead of being in positions to deny or delay care. But they've got operations spread all over the country. They have operations in Florida. All of them have operations in Florida. Cigna, I know, and United have operations down there. They have facilities, and so they like military contractors. They have employees in congressional districts, and they will tell members of Congress, look, if you support this bill, we'll close the operations in Tampa or wherever it might be. So it's that kind of intimidation as well too. They do have claims processing and customer service operations across the country, but we don't need them. To your point earlier, these companies, you have to question what their value proposition is. And they, shortly before I left the industry, I was in a leadership meeting with our CEO. His name was Ed Hanway at that time. And someone asked him what kept him up at night. And he came out with this big long word, disintermediation. And then he followed up and said that means that he feared that at some point customers, in particular American businesses, would wake up and begin to question the value proposition. Obviously that's jargon, but that means that his worry was that corporations would begin to catch on to the fact that they've been sold a bill of goods by insurance companies over many years, and that they don't add value, they just add expenses to employers.
Yeah, there's no added value. They're really just sort of holding an empty bag of nothing. Yeah. They're taking money and skimming money in a process that doesn't need to include them in any way, and yet have convinced all of us that we can't do it without them. I come from a medical family. My husband's a physician. We've been together since I typed his med school applications on a typewriter. So medicine is definitely the hand that feeds us, and most physicians are not generally pro this idea of single payer healthcare because they have been propagandized for so many years that you won't make the same money. It's so bad. Look at them in Canada. So the thing is, we do know a lot of them in Canada, and they have nice lives, and they're happy, and they have their priorities straight. And the other thing I always point out is, as a doctor, my husband is a small business owner. He can't stand having to deal with paying for he'd much rather not have to pay for his employees' insurance, and not have to deal with insurance companies and having them tell him what he can and can't do. I mean, even if doctors were to, and I've said to him before, even if you were to forego, what if you had to forego some of your income, but we got rid of all of the stress of your life from dealing with managed care? He would do it in a minute.
Yeah.
He would do it in a minute, just dealing with the insurance companies, the staff that they have to deal with these issues. Like, it's so unnecessary.
It is. It's unnecessary. And you go to Canada, and physicians there don't have the same overhead. They don't have the same hassle.
Exactly.
When they treat a patient, they submit a claim to the government, and it's paid. And there's no second guessing about what the doctor, how he or she wants to treat the patient. That is not the case here. I often talk about the barriers that insurance companies have erected that make it more and more difficult for people to get the care that they need and the care that their doctors know that they need. They've gotten very aggressive, more aggressive in recent years with what's referred to as prior authorization, which means that doctors have to ask, in many cases beg, for approval before they can treat a patient and expect to get paid for it. It's not just for treatments, but it's for drugs as well too, medications. The other another major thing, and in fact I wrote about it today in a Twitter thread, is saddling people with high deductibles, high out-of-pocket costs. People with insurance are not getting the care that they need, not only because of prior authorization restrictions and delays, but because they don't have enough money to pay out of their own pocket what they have to pay before their coverage kicks in. About 40% of Americans, according to the Federal Reserve, don't have $400 to cover an emergency, much less $8,000 to meet a deductible. And that's for a single person. You can. Many families have deductibles of $15,000 or more. So that is a huge barrier, and it causes people to die.
Yeah. I mean, it's the underinsured. It's uninsured and underinsured. Yeah. And, what I've been saying for a really long time is, we know that medical costs is like the #1 cause of bankruptcies in our country. And the amount of stress and grief and pressure and just general misery as a result of people not having health care, both preventatively and then what happens to them in debt, going into debt afterwards. This chain of events, there's really nothing else like it. It's really something that is extraordinary in that it doesn't have to be that way. And yet we just go through this and we've sold ourselves that we need to have it this way. Like we don't deserve nice things.
We've been sold this line, this thinking for a long, long time. And people we grew up with this system, and we've been told that nobody can do it better than we can. And so we've been told lies that we've believed. Earlier today, I moderated a panel that included a woman in Sacramento, California. The reason she was on this panel was because she had sought treatment at a free medical clinic operated by Remote Area Medical a few years ago. She had been insured by Cigna. She was in a Cigna PPO, but she had to pay so much money out of her own pocket for the care that she needed. Her family went bankrupt. It's just unconscionable that people with insurance are having to file for bankruptcy. And you're exactly right. If you're sick, that's enough to worry about, enough to have to tend to, and to saddle you with the additional worry of how you're going to pay for the care that you need, even with insurance, is absurd. It's insane that we keep putting up with this. Physicians too. I've talked to a lot of physicians, physician groups, and I know that a lot of this is the term moral injury came to be used, during war. That soldiers have suffered from moral injury. It's now being applied in the medical profession. Doctors talk about that. They know that they are not able to provide the care that they know their patients need because of the intrusion of insurance companies. And so there's moral injury there. It is a big reason for physician burnout and why a lot of doctors are retiring early and even discouraging their children from going into the practice of medicine.
Yeah.
We're speaking with Wendell Potter, who is a former top executive of Cigna and a author who has spilled the beans, if you will, on our completely false healthcare system in this country, because it ain't anything about care. I would like to know from your perspective, what is the key to creating more momentum? I mean, obviously language matters. I think having statewide initiatives do matter, even if it is completely different in terms of how federal dollars are allocated versus state and local. But I do think having state chapters matter, and obviously messaging matters.
Yeah.
You are to put the thinking cap on and say, all right, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to create momentum in a way that maybe Bernie was not able to do enough of. How do we take it to the next level from your perspective to actually not only getting a vote on it, but basically creating enough momentum where they just can't ignore it anymore, and then eventually it's just a matter of time before it does happen?
Part of it is building bench strength of candidates to run for public office who support this. A lot have, as you well know, you've done it. But we need to do that more. Earlier on that same panel, there was a young man in Tennessee who ran for state legislature. He came up short, but he hasn't given up. He's now working to try to help other candidates, encourage other candidates, other progressive candidates in Tennessee to run for public office and to help them figure out messaging. That's a big part of the work that I do as well, is to help candidates and help organizations and people talk about this. How do you communicate to people who have been brainwashed all these years? How can you communicate with them in ways that they don't shut down when you begin to talk to them about the need to change? You need also to push back against the propaganda and the lies. A big part also of the work that I'm doing is to point out just how these lies are convincing people to vote against their own best interest, what their tactics are. I'm working with advocates in Colorado and Connecticut and other states that are trying to, that are supporting progressive change in those states as well as in Washington, to help them push back against this propaganda. A lot of it is exposure and exposing the tactics of the industry. It takes time to do it because you're trying to overcome literally decades of propaganda, but you got to do it. You need, when I said earlier though, that you need to have more bench strength, it's very, very important to get candidates who are willing to put themselves out, put themselves up to run for public office, to be equipped themselves. This fellow in Tennessee was telling me, and I'm sure you would identify with this, you run, but there's nothing necessarily that equips you to be as effective in messaging as you should be. So that's very important to help candidates. I was on a call more than a year ago with Pramila Jayapal and I think Katie Porter and some other folks who other members of Congress, and it was a call with candidates who were running for Congress, and it was in the primary, who supported Medicare for all, or were interested in knowing more about it and how to talk about it. So that has to go on. You've got to be able to encourage and help candidates talk about this and how to answer questions. And it's slow. I wish we could say that it can be done in the short term, but you've got to also realize this. You've got to be in this for the long haul.
Yeah, there's no question that was. When Jen ran for Congress against Wasserman Schultz, and I'm sure you're very familiar with her, she is a darling of the private insurance, big pharma industry. Her reputation precedes her with the amount of money she's taken from them. But I will say that what we did have in terms of a campaign advantage, obviously there weren't many, all things considered, especially for a first run, is we did have a really awesome person out in Sacramento who had worked for Google and was really identifying ways to reach, some more of that older demographic who was very dependent on already have Medicare or are familiar with the system and, what may be coming. We really were able to close the gap on a lot of voters when it came to Social Security expansion and universal health coverage, because even if you do have what we have today in Medicare, which is good, it's nowhere near as good as it could be. And I think that type of message needs to be duplicated nationwide. And it does take more work because, as you know, there's a lot of big tech censorship. And anybody who's going to be preaching a message of, we need to basically dismantle the private insurance industry and completely not dismantle, but at least render big pharma infinitely less effective than it is now in terms of how they are able to dominate the financial sector. I think that's something that does need to be duplicated. We're obviously huge fans of Nina Turner. Personally think that she's one of the true leaders of this progressive movement and can actually build the movement bigger than it already is, leaps and bounds, should she get to a congressional seat, which, knock on wood, we believe she will.
I do too.
But I do think we need to expand in different ways. I do think, as I'm sure you would agree, if you're going to pick off U.S. Senate seats, that's where the real trick comes into play, because that's where the really insane money comes in. You can take down a congressional representative with even $1 million. But if you want to take down a U.S. senator in a moderate sized state, you're going to need at least 10 million, if not more. And to raise that kind of money, it's not easy, especially if you're trying to do it in small dollar donations. So I do think that that's one part of the equation. But I'm also curious to know what your thoughts are on potentially trying to duplicate the similar approach as the Democrats have been attempting to do, the non-corporate Democrats, if you will. What about the prospect of potentially having non-corporate Republicans run for office?
I think it's worth pursuing. I have talked with a lot of Republicans. There's some things that I've done in my advocacy. One is to try to advocate for expanding dental benefits. And I mention this in particular because there are a lot of progressive advocates who are advocating for having states license mid-level dental therapists in dentistry, clinicians who are similar to nurse practitioners. Organized dentistry is very much opposed to it. But there are Republicans who have been on board with this because from their perspective, they see this as a so-called free market solution to helping people get dental care that they need. I think it's possible. I also have gotten acquainted with a number of Republican state legislators, again, in my home state of Tennessee, who've told me about how they've been intimidated by some of these organizations like Americans for Prosperity, which is a Koch-funded, as you probably know.
Charlie Kirk.
Yeah, they wield enormous clout in a lot of states, and I think there's resentment and how they, we talked about how corporations are able to push around a lot of folks. So do those organizations, and I think it is possible to conceivably talk to some Republicans, and I wouldn't bet the whole farm on that by any means, but I think it's worth pursuing. I'm glad you mentioned Medicare and seniors. I think it is possible to get more of them to understand the need for what we're talking about here and to push for it. When we talk about Medicare for all, I think it's really important to talk about improving Medicare for all, expanding it and improving it. There is no dental benefit in Medicare. There's no vision benefit, no hearing benefit, nothing, no long-term care. There's no cap on out-of-pocket spending. So the Medicare program needs to be improved, and you can really talk to seniors to help them, and they get this. They understand that if I've not met a senior yet who is not happy to be in the Medicare program, but they know it can be better. And why should we make them or require them to buy a Medicare supplement policy to cover their out-of-pocket costs? It makes no sense. And why do people enroll in these Medicare Advantage plans, which are operated by private insurance companies? Is because they've, once again, been bamboozled and sold a bill of goods by the insurance companies. But we need to really improve the traditional Medicare program by adding benefits and putting a cap on out-of-pocket spending. And I think that you could really win some seniors over if you can help them understand, here's what we propose to do for you and for future generations as they age into Medicare.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that always comes up is prescription costs. and what is covered and what isn't covered. And this absolutely affects seniors. Both of my parents get Medicare, and yet it matters where they get their prescriptions and how much things cost, and some things that they can get and some things they can't. And so that's with Medicare. So it's better, but it's still not great in terms of the pharmaceutical companies' dominance.
It's insane. I mean, I'm a Medicare beneficiary myself now too. I have a drug plan, and there's a Rite Aid close to me that's more convenient. But I can my medications would cost less if I go to CVS.
Right?
Why? It makes no sense, and I know why. I mean, I was around.
You know why?
Yeah, I know why it is. But we put up with it. We shouldn't put up with this nonsense.
Yeah. And I agree. And that was one of the things when I first started running, that you do tend to find that the single payer healthcare issue is definitely not as big among seniors. It isn't, because they have theirs. A lot of them are very entitled about it in a way that I've had to wait. You should have to wait. That sort of hazing mentality. And so
that's a boomer generation.
It is. And you know what? It is. And so there is that. But when you do explain that their benefits should even be better, then now you're kind of talking, because it's unfortunate that people need to be spoken to in a personal way, because they can't just relate to everyone else not having healthcare. Yeah. But yeah, it's unfortunate. But let me ask you, what are you working on right now? Like, what current projects are you working on, or what would you want to promote? What's your most recent stuff?
Well, one is related to just what we were talking about, trying to improve Medicare, but also for people who have private insurance. I continue to support Medicare for all, and I will do that until we get there. We've got to do some things that can help people with their private insurance be able to get the coverage they need. People are dying every single day because of these high deductibles. I cited a study that came out just this week that showed that people who are on Medicare, if they have to pay even $10.40 more for prescription medication, they're 33% more likely to die. I mean, even small amounts, seemingly small amounts, make a huge difference in us, psychologically, and also our ability to even pay that small amount of an out-of-pocket obligation. So I am really going to be beating the drum to try to get members of Congress and the Biden administration to pay attention to this. We've got President Biden saying we need to fix the Affordable Care Act. You've got Speaker Pelosi saying she wants to make the additional subsidies permanent for ACA people. Keep in mind, that's worthy. But only about 23 million Americans get their coverage through the Obamacare marketplace. The vast majority of people who have insurance get it through their employer, and their coverage is increasingly crappy. We've got to change the way insurance companies do business until we can figure out how to shut them down, to be honest with you. I will be spending a lot of time focusing on just how awful and the harm that these high deductible plans. That's one of the reasons I left Cigna, by the way. There are a number of reasons, but I was expected to be a cheerleader for this industry-wide trend to move every last one of us as quickly as possible into high deductible plans. That is why, one of the big reasons why United Healthcare today was able to have a record-breaking record-breaking profits for the first 3 months of this year, 40% more than the 3 months last year, is because they don't have to pay as many claims anymore.
That is what you ultimately would call the hubris, eventually just getting too far and wide, and pride takes over, and you just can't admit that this is going to fail. It's like, no, we can get everybody, and we can always make more money, and we can always expand. Before we do get to this question, there is one thing that I did want to ask you. I don't want to forget about it. We do have a very good friend down here who his name is Cliff. He works in Medicare, particularly Medicare Part D is his specialty. He does believe that the first step to getting Medicare for all in the United States is to lower the eligibility age from 65 to 60, potentially 65 to 55. If we were even just able to reduce the age from 65 to 60, there would be, I believe, about 17 million people in this country who would automatically become eligible for Medicare. And if that were to happen, that would really start driving the narrative of, well, now we got to get it from 60 to 55. And brick by brick, you start knocking it down. And I believe that that's what Bernie's plan was over a 4-year period, to basically reduce it, to take it down a decade per year until eventually everybody's in, which I think makes a lot of sense. But you know what, at this point, anything that can move the needle where it needs to go, I think would be a tremendous win. And I think it wouldn't stop there. I think that's why they fight so hard, as you know. They don't want anything of positivity to come into people's minds, because if it does, I think it would turn into a house of cards. What do you think?
I agree with that. And I know Bernie will be reintroducing his Medicare for All bill, which you're exactly right. I'm assuming it may be the same as it was the last time. It's a 4-year phase in, reducing the age of eligibility gradually. And also on the other end, to enroll children when they're born into the Medicare program, to enroll people when they lose their jobs or their insurance. So you can do it in multiple ways. So lowering the age of eligibility to 60, if that's what we wind up doing. Biden campaigned on that. So let's try for 50. You may have to settle for 60, but that is progress. And then trying to figure out how can you also make sure that people can get it if they lose their employer-sponsored coverage or when their kids are born. So I think you're right. We can do it. We can.
I mean, look, COBRA, it does not help. I mean, I know so few people that have ever been helped by that. That is absurd. So we have a huge problem in this country where I think we've got a lot of miserable people sitting at miserable jobs because they can't afford to give up their insurance.
Absolutely.
And I think that not only is not mentally sound, it causes depression and all that, but we lose out on so much inspiration and innovation and ingenuity and entrepreneurship and all these things because people are sitting like drones at jobs because they're scared to lose their insurance, which is pathetic.
It's true. It's true. We've locked people into these jobs. They, in many cases, hate their jobs, but they will try to stick with it as long as they can because of the benefits. And they're not in control. I mean, they're at the whim of their employers, so they can lose their jobs, as we saw millions of people do during the pandemic. It's a horrible, horrible thing for coverage to be tied to employment. And a lot of employers are waking up to that. I also lead an organization called Business Leaders for Healthcare Transformation. Most of our members are business people who support Medicare for All. We represent 3,200 businesses all across the country. And so businesses are beginning to wake up. Employers are beginning to realize this doesn't work for them either. It's not working for them or the people that they employ.
And we definitely agree that the future to building a sustainable non-corporate movement in this country is through nonpartisan. It is through a nonpartisan labor movement, and that is a great segue to this question from K Noodlehead.
Noodlehead.
Question is, why does the exchange charge more for plans than employers pay for similar or better plans? It's a good question.
Yeah, but it varies. It's all over the board. It varies from state to state. And some people are eligible for subsidies or not. One reason is because employers self-insure, and large employers have an advantage. By self-insuring, that really means that those employers are really the insurer, and they just hire companies like Cigna and United and Aetna to administer the benefits, so they can take advantage of a group. And the Obamacare exchanges try to create, and they have to a certain extent, a real group in the individual market. But essentially, you've got people who are buying coverage on their own and are not able to have the same benefits necessarily as some of the people in employer plans. But again, I stress that it varies from state to state. Some states are better than others in making sure that the premiums are affordable. I keep mentioning Tennessee, but Tennessee is a state where people enrolled in the Obamacare plans had to pay more out of their own pockets for coverage than people in other states, or their premiums cost more. It shouldn't. Tennessee is not that much of an expensive state for health care.
No.
But it varies. Some states do it much better. California is a state that regulates the insurers that participate in the exchanges there than a lot of other states.
Yeah, and we have, as you've seen over the past few years, seen various attempts to try to do it at the state level. Colorado Care obviously failed. It failed because they have a very interesting clause. I don't remember the exact language, but you know what I'm talking about. It's written into the state constitution where basically
he probably knows.
There's like you have to be able to budget it in. Do you remember what the exact language is?
I don't remember exactly. They also had the problem of the way the ballot initiative language was constructed.
Yes,
and it scared the bejesus out of people because you had to say, this will
That's
cost
what it is.
X amount of dollars. That plus, and I was concerned about this from the beginning. They were trying to do it as as a ballot initiative, and I knew that the insurance industry and its allies would throw just so much money to scare people, and they did. I spent a lot of time in Colorado working with advocates, and it's a shame, but it goes back to what we were saying earlier. These industries spend so much money to lie and scare people, and people don't realize that what they're being fed is just a bunch of lies.
Right. I always find it interesting when they threaten people that they're trying to take away your insurance and that's a bad thing. I'm always like, please take my insurance. Like right. Who wants their insurance? Like, and it's just so interesting. We're like Stockholm syndrome or something, like where we somehow are convinced that our captors are people. Like, this is crazy.
I mean, at this point, does it really make sense to have insurance versus just going into an urgent care facility if you have to pay $150 or whatever it is?
That's part of the problem.
I mean, to me, it's like, where's the value? Because there isn't any.
Just this week, it's interesting you mentioned, but a lot of hospitals are beginning to look differently at private pay patients. And so are pharmacies. You can, in many cases, get your medication cheaper by not showing your drug card, your insurance card. It's insane. So hospitals and I'm sure doctors are giving cash paying patients more of a discount for one reason, that they're getting sick of dealing with insurance companies. So they're rethinking how they deal with people who just pay cash. A lot of folks can't do it, obviously, but it's becoming a trend.
I mean, we see how we have people in this country that use our emergency rooms as primary care offices, and we know that that is so completely inefficient and it's unsound for so many reasons. And I think that when we look at how our response has been to COVID in particular, we are seeing a bevy of problems and outcomes and issues that are the result of a country that doesn't have healthcare. And whether it's that we have overly vulnerable people because our people, we have more people with diabetes or whatever it is, because our people don't get care. And so these things have exponential ramifications. That isn't just a matter of you don't get to go to the doctor. Well, no, but now you're more susceptible to this pandemic and this problem. And I think that it's just so glaringly obvious at this point.
It is. It absolutely is. And thank you, Martha. I see you on the screen. Thank you. But you're right. The Stockholm syndrome is absolutely correct. And as I said earlier, we're like hostages who were born into this. And we don't know different, I sometimes say. And we have been led to believe that nobody can do anything better than we Americans can. And we've been lied to about the Canadian system, the system in the UK. So yeah, we're victims of the Stockholm syndrome, for sure.
Now we are, as you know, the World Health Index is what I recommend that everybody look at, because that's where you get the most accurate information based on a myriad of different things as far as where myriad. I say that word wrong every time. There's a certain level of where our country is ranked. The United States is ranked 37th. So if I were you, I would stop saying we're the best at healthcare, because we are so far from it. If you were to list, I'm sure you've traveled. So if you were to list a country And amazingly, when Trump was running for president, he talked about the time that he was in Ireland golfing and a friend of his got sick and ended up in the hospital. And he's like, yeah, he totally didn't have to pay anything. He just walked out the door. It was no problem. And I'm thinking,
that's the rest of the world.
I mean, even a message like that can go really far. Quite frankly, you should probably have that clip and just show it to every Trump supporter in the country. But I'm curious from your perspective, what would be the model that you would base our country on? If you were to pick a country and say, this is the one you really want to follow.
Some are better than others. Some have, I just think there's got to be a way for us to take what works best and do a system that's the best. But what do you think would be the best way to do it?
No, I agree with you. I agree with you, Jen. I don't think you would necessarily transplant the Canadian system here or the system in the UK here. I think you can look at what works best in those countries. The Commonwealth Fund does a survey of the health system performance in the developed world, at least 11 countries. And the U.S., of those 11 countries, always ranks dead last, even after the Affordable Care Act. We're dead last. Sometimes, more recently, I think the system in the U.K. was ranked the best. This panel I was on early today was really about a documentary about Stan Brock, the guy who founded Remote Area Medical, who was a Brit, and the filmmakers are British, and they were talking about the difference between the British system and our system. It's so much better. You will not hear people in Britain or Canada complain about their healthcare system. They wouldn't trade it for the U.S. system in a minute, and they're just baffled that we believe the things we do about their system and that we put up with the system that we do. The French have a pretty darn good system. The Scandinavians, the Japanese do, the Taiwanese. I mean, you can just go down the list, and they all.
Singapore has a good system. I know there's good, there's lots of places with good systems.
I would say that if we're looking at the capitalist systems that have the best healthcare, obviously Germany comes to mind. Pretty much every country in Scandinavia comes to mind, and. Obviously they're a very homogeneous culture, but Japan obviously does a great job as well. The people in this country are obviously very fearful of this whole government takeover of healthcare. I try to tell people all the time, there's a significant difference between what is government-run healthcare in a country like China or Cuba versus government-funded healthcare, which is what we're aiming for. We want a single-payer system.
Yeah, they have better healthcare than us in Cuba.
Well, they do, but the argument, of course, is in a government-run system like they have in communist countries, the doctors are capped in terms of how much they can make. And that is one thing that in the States, that's never going to take. But what you could have is that compromise position, which is we just want to remove the for-profit middlemen who are literally taking a third of the money we put into healthcare every year and just putting it into their pocket as profit. They are literally, they're robber barons is what they are. They are not doing anything of benefit. They're taking our money.
There's no value.
No value whatsoever.
There's no value.
So I do think that those countries in particular have the right idea. I think it's just being able to distinguish between this idea of a government takeover versus a government funding of a healthcare system, and then just hammering away at that message of got to get rid of the for-profit middlemen because they do absolutely nothing. And most would agree. When I have never heard, when I hear people say, I like my insurance.
No one likes their insurance.
You like your doctor. You do not like your insurance.
No one likes their insurance company. That's not a thing.
You're exactly right.
It's not
at that point, the government takeover was a term that came straight out of the insurance industry. Can
we credit you with that? Was that on your communications team?
No, actually, yes. I think that.
I can't claim to have created it, but we sure used the hell out of it.
The last president that I ever saw really preach universal health care to this country was a man who took a sniper bullet in his head in Dallas, Texas. And if you've ever seen the speech that JFK did give in Madison Square Garden about universal health care, which was not long before he was killed.
You're obsessed with Jack.
This lovely gentleman who has spent an hour with us this evening was a young man at the time, but I'm sure you remember just what an impact he did have on this country when he became president, and how even to this day it still resonates that he was cut down when he was, because there were a lot of things that he talked about it when he was president for those 3 years that really had a profound impact. But if anybody has not seen his speech about universal health care at Madison Square Garden, I highly recommend you take a look at it because it's really inspiring, at least from my perspective. And one of the things we like to do when we wind down our podcast with our guests is to ask, what does generational change mean to you?
You know, it means encouragement to me, to be honest with you. I talk with a lot of students, a lot of medical students, a lot of people who get the change that we need. I often say that I think I'm optimistic about the future because of the commitment to to change and the broader acceptance, I think, of change by young people. One of the impediments to change is that it's been so easy to scare people by saying that if we reform our healthcare system, we'll be going down the slippery slope towards socialism. That is a term that scares the hell out of a lot of folks. Not so much young people, and good. A lot of reasons for that. But I find that a lot of young people that I see are not, they understand, they're not as gullible maybe as previous generations. So I'm very encouraged.
Yeah.
Well, we are in Havana, Florida, so
yeah.
you have to accept the fact that that's par for the course. We are literally just north of the biggest Cuban population in the United States. So it is what it is, and that's something it is a generational divide in many ways. But I do think a lot of people are coming around. And I think one of the things that we did see in Jen's congressional race is that with the abundance of support with the demographic ages 18 to 35, a lot of them were pushing on their 45 to 65 age demographic, whether it be parents or even, dare I say, grandparents, that it's time to give us the keys. It's time to allow us our turn.
Yeah.
You know, you had your days of FDR to JFK, and then many of you did benefit from the days of Reaganomics, but now we're bringing it. Now the pendulum's swinging back. It's basically every 40 years, and we're kind of we're right there right now. And I do think it's going to happen. I just think it's sort of like we're living in the age of technology, which is a great thing, and it's also a terrible thing. It's just a question of how we cultivate it the right way. Yeah. But I really think you've done an amazing job of explaining tonight to our audience, and hopefully, you know, thousands of people will ultimately see this, where they'll have a better idea and a better understanding of where we can actually start to build that momentum. Because the simpler you make it, the easier it's going to be to convey that message. I always say, as cliche as it is, but Make America Great Again worked. Keeping it simple is how it really does work. And just like with everybody wondering, you know, what do we do to actually have legitimate police reform in the United States? If you hammer away at ending qualified immunity, to me, that is the one issue that you could unify the country around.
You're digressing.
I'm not digressing.
You're digressing. So how can people find you and follow what's going on, or what organizations can people look to get information on any of these projects that you're working on, or legislation that's important?
Mm-hmm. Follow me on Twitter at Wendell Potter, and you'll see how to click on the organizations that I lead. Check out centerforhealthanddemocracy.org.
Center for Health
and let us know what you think. You know, we're nonprofits and we're advocating for change. I'd like to say this: you guys were. This is one of the best interviews I've had in a long, long time. Yeah, very good and informative.
Thank you.
So I appreciate being invited to be with you, and thanks for being as good as you are.
Thank you. You know, we do get that, and what's so funny is, like, we don't have anything planned.
I haven't.
Like, no. we don't have anything planned. Like, we know the topic and we know what, like, the issues, like, we know that, but we don't have anything planned or anything.
The funny thing is, we talk about this a lot, and it just so happens, and you probably know this as well as anybody, South Florida is one of the worst places in this country to try to enact change, because it's very rigid, it's very transient, and it's an older demographic. And a lot of our representation has been in place for, in this case, Wasserman Schultz has basically run Broward for 30 years. That's a generation. So to try to have that change, it doesn't come easy. But I do think our message is resonating. It's just a matter of how we really cultivate it, because if we could change anything in Florida, you could change the whole country.
Well, yeah, that's what we call it, Florida. And we're definitely the last of places to get nice things.
Centerforhealthanddemocracy.org.
Centerforhealthanddemocracy.org.
Perfect.
And so, yeah, I mean, we don't have high hopes for us necessarily, at least not in my lifetime. Possibly, I'm pushing 50. I'm not thinking, but in general, just moving the needle is so important. And I think that, I appreciate your efforts in this fight so much, because we need people from that side to come over come over from the dark side.
I think as long as we are continuing to move the needle in the right direction, and there's always going to be things that are going to get thrown at us. The Florida GOP is one of the most detrimental, regressive political parties.
They're busy trying to save Matt Gaetz right now.
Yeah, you're saving Matt Gaetz, and at the same time, you're trying to pay. And what's even more interesting is that there's so many caveats in this anti-trans bill that they're trying to pass through.
All right,
it's just so bad.
Free Wendell from us.
But what we are trying to do is, like I said, we're really trying to utilize this whole concept of a nonpartisan.
Yes, we are nonpartisan.
Because I have no doubt. And as I'm sure you've experienced, the biggest impediment to progress from most people's, from the layperson's perspective, as soon as it becomes Democrats versus Republicans, I'm out. I don't want to do this. I don't want to know anything about it.
It's just too divisive. It's just too divisive. We generally tend to stay issues. You stay issues and you make your allies per issue. I might agree with you on healthcare. Maybe we don't agree on the environment, so we don't have to work together on that, but we could work together on this. And that's just how we plug ahead.
Well, listen, my favorite president, period, is Teddy Roosevelt. And to me, he is the embodiment of what true conservatism is all about, especially when it comes to things like the environment. Jen has made some great friends down here that are in the Republican Party.
Don't tell people that. Then I get all judged. Thank you so much, Wendell, for coming on and sharing your wealth of information with us.
There was plenty, but we certainly look forward to having you again. Would you... we haven't made any plans for it yet, but if we were to do any type of a Medicare for All
panel,
summit,
live
telethon,
stream,
anything like that, we certainly hope you would consider coming back for something like that.
Just ask.
All right. Thank you so much. Yeah. We like to do panel, So
do I.
Yeah.
She was on my panel today. So speaking of her, yes, I'd be happy to do it.
Thank you so much, Wendell. It was so nice to meet you.
A real pleasure, and we look forward to speaking with you again. Have a wonderful
year. My pleasure. Thank you, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.
And needless to say, that was
everyone likes us.
Not everybody. Well, everybody
guests.
Like you,
no. The guests that are always very appreciative for how we are. Not everyone likes us, but guests.
Here's a guy who sits on like the kind of panels where he's as informed as anybody, and for him to say that this is as much as of a podcast he's ever enjoyed, I'm like, oh, all right.
Well, we've gotten that before from people, though.
Yes, but to get that from him,
I
mean, he's in DC. I mean, he's
insider person, knows been on all sorts of panels. Well, you know what? Because I think that we're not so structured. I think that people appreciate that.
Well, we're good on the fly, and I always like the idea of just being able to do things. But
So and that should be the case for please.
He has a message.
No.
He wants to let everybody know.
No.
Whatever he was saying, it's totally trash. I never ever said that Ireland has good health care. It's a total lie. I never said that on Jimmy Fallon's show. He totally didn't rub my hair and make me look like a fool. That never happened. Believe me when I tell you. Don't touch the hair. Never touch the hair. The hair's not allowed to be touched.
I bet you that this actually kind of feels like what his hair feels like.
It probably does. You never know, but I'm never going to tell you the truth. You're never going to know exactly why it's like that.
Oh my God.
But the truth is, the private insurance industry, big pharma, they're really great people.
It's a racket.
They're really great. They're really great. No, they're really great people.
Yeah.
And we are gonna get rid of Obamacare, and we're gonna give everybody Trump care. And you know what that means? More money for the insurance industry. And it's gonna be really great. It's gonna be really incredible. People just have to live healthier lives. They should live like me. They should eat McDonald's 3 times a day. 3 times a day. You eat your McDonald's. You have your big fries. Oh no, it's really great. You know where that food comes from?
Oh, I do.
Well,
I do know where that food goes.
Well, I only know where the food goes after I eat it. So that's the most important part of it all. It tastes great and it feels even greater afterwards, if you know what I'm talking about. But believe me when I tell you, you totally don't want to listen to this Wendell Potter guy. He doesn't know what he's talking about. We really don't need to give everybody health care because we're giving them Trump care, which is health care, but not for everybody.
Okay, so before we wrap up.
We're not wrapping. We're totally just getting started.
No, because
I am getting really tired of talking about Matt Gaetz. He keeps calling me. He keeps asking for help, and I can't give it to him. He keeps thinking that I'm going to save the day, but he forgets I'm only the president of Mar-a-Lago now. I'm not the president of the United States anymore.
Mar-a-Lago is not a sovereign nation.
Well, that's not true. Trust me, when you see the gates, when you walk by, you see what I did there? Do you see what I did right there? I said, check the gates. He ain't checking the gates. He's not doing a good job.
All right, so
totally not doing a good job.
Can we?
But remember what I said, guys. Totally never listen to a guy who says that we don't need private insurance in big pharma. It's not a great idea. It's a terrible idea. And you know why? Because it's all about the stock market. What does the stock market say? Invest in private insurance in big pharma. That's all I have to tell you. Have a wonderful evening.
So before we go, I thought I would just do like a quick wrap up of what my witnessing of the Derek Chauvin trial, since I feel like I've been watching it so intently from start to finish. I feel like I need to bear witness to this trial. And I mean,
you are an attorney after all. So
yeah, but it's more than that. And really, I've been watching it very painstakingly, like really watching it. And the only times I forward through are when they're going over like the credentials. Like I don't need to hear where the pulmonologist went to college and medical school. I'm going to assume he's highly credentialed or they wouldn't be calling him. So I don't need to hear all that. But everything that they say about the case, the judge's rulings have been really on. Even, today there was a ruling I wasn't happy with, but he was right. Like there's certain things. But yeah, the defense rested. So next up will be closing arguments, and it'll be really interesting to see what happens. My prediction is, and like I said to you, this would be like if we were on Sports Center and you were predicting game outcomes. This is sort of like the legal equivalent.
Hey, what are the odds going right now that he's going to be convicted or he's going to get off?
This is my prediction, and this is my prediction. My prediction is that he will not get convicted on the second degree charge, that he will get convicted on the third degree charge. And I am hopeful that he could get the maximum on the third degree charge, which is 25 years. Now, if they convicted him on the second degree charge, he could get 40 years. But I don't think that there is reason for me looking at the components of second degree murder to question whether or not they've been able to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt, the elements of that involving Chauvin's mindset and intention. I mean, there's a lot of things. Like it's not a matter of what we want. Like what I want is for him to be in prison for the rest of his life, which anybody who knows what happens to bad cops in prison won't be very long.
No.
So in reality, for someone like Derek Chauvin, 25 years, that's life. That's life. Yeah. Because even if you have the possibility of parole after, let's say 10 years, 12 years, whatever it is, I don't think somebody like him is making it that long in prison. So that's just my take. So my prediction is they'll get a third degree conviction, and hopefully they will be able to get 25 years. Anything less than 20 years, I think that the city is going to be set on fire in a way the likes of which we haven't seen in a really long time.
Oh, it'll be like the Watts riots. It'll be.
I think, and I think that unfortunately,
1968.
That you're obsessed with 1968.
It's a special year.
So it's a very special year. So that's my prediction: third degree murder conviction. And my mind is, if he doesn't get at least 20 years, preferably 25, which is the max, that would be ideal. And I do believe that they've been able to prove that. I do believe they've been able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt the elements of a third degree charge. Remember, for anybody who doesn't know, not all states have third degree murder. It is in between second degree and manslaughter. And what it's known as is depraved mind murder, depraved indifference murder. So it's essentially, you're not intentionally killing someone, but it's not negligent either. It's, you could know that what you're doing could kill somebody, and you're doing it anyway. And so that is a category that this really does perfectly fit well. And I do think that the evidence does show that. The defense's witnesses none of them were remotely credible or decent enough to overpower anything that the prosecution put out. So overall, I have been, and I've liked this judge. I think that they've been very by the book. I think that it's been handled very professionally. And all things considered, I've been pleased with the due process that has been in order. So that is my assessment.
Very good, counselor. Very good. And so we want to thank all of you. We definitely had a lot of viewers tonight, and that's great. And we hope that you'll share.
Subscribe.
Please subscribe.
And
click the bell.
Be a
like,
Patreon.
Comment, and share. And yes.
And here's the thing. We don't push it, but I think we can. And this is why I think we can. So you guys listen. If you go to our Patreon, which is in the description, I'm assuming, John, it's in the description.
Yes.
Okay. So yes, for $1 a month, you can help support our channel. And really, it's the numbers of people that are supporting us that matter, not necessarily the amount of money. So while, yeah, money is helpful. And by the way, so everyone knows, all money for generational change goes to our GenCore service organization.
We're not doing this for a career, unlike a lot of other YouTubers. We have our own careers.
Well, all of the money for generational change goes to GenCore,
correct,
which is our nonprofit. It's a service organization. We are not a 501c3, but that's because we do want to be able to endorse candidates. So we are, we're waiting for our status, 501c4 status, but we are doing things like spending money doing beach cleanups, buying things like buckets and trash pickers. We're putting together bags for survival packs for homeless people. So that's the kind of stuff that I'm spending the GenCore money on. It's service. So for as little as $1 a month, you could be a Patreon. And if you're $5 a month Patreon, you get a bracelet. And if you're a $10 a month Patreon, you get
let's show them
a generational change jersey.
Them.
Okay.
And I think it's very important to remember that, like I said, everybody we know is struggling financially right now.
Oh yeah.
But just know that if you do want to help us out, it does go a very long way. They're actually
so cute. Look, see, here comes the sun on the front, and the sleeves are purple. And then on the back, it has generational change. And
this is ultimately what is going to make the difference long term, because more and more people need to be doing it for this reason. And I don't lament anybody who does, have a YouTube channel for a living. But I think it's probably refreshing for a lot of people to know that we're doing this because we genuinely care. Yeah. We are not doing it for the money.
No, and look, if we got to a point where we had a revenue stream and we could afford to pay people like our producer and pay people like a volunteer coordinator, I'm not averse to having money coming in. But this is not, it's not a profit business. Nobody's getting rich here. We don't have shareholders. We are, I'm just trying to put together bags for the homeless people.
Well, if you like our content, and we're going to have some really awesome guests coming up. So if you like Wendell Potter.
Who's coming up on Monday? Do we know who's coming on Monday yet?
Looks like right now we are going to finally have JC Garcia, who is the head of the painters, or one of the heads, I should say. Don't call him the president. You don't want to call him the president.
No. Like business representative.
He's the business representative of the IUPAT, which is
the International Union of Painters and Trades.
That is extremely generous of you,
wow,
Mr. Noodlehead.
That's awesome, Noodlehead.
And we were not making fun of you for having that name.
Yes,
I actually think it's fun. I think it's funny.
Well, it is, but you can make fun of somebody for something that they choose to be when they're being silly.
Well, in honor of
no one chooses that as a serious.
Well, in honor of being a Noodlehead, I think we have to get a pasta dish of some kind. I think that would just naturally occur. But no, it's on
the 29th. On the 29th, it's the all-you-can-eat gnocchi at that place in Pines.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. There you go. Yeah, there's a good small business restaurant that's close to here.
Yeah, Declan, you know my number.
Yes. Oh, yes, absolutely. Well, Declan, every once in a while, Declan's got a smart-ass comment that is actually pretty good. Socialize with a Z, not an S. Just saying. Just putting that out there.
I don't know, but I think maybe he's European.
Maybe he is. Declan yeah, maybe. Yeah, that's certainly possible.
Never know.
But again, the importance of recognizing what we're trying to do here. And before we depart, why don't you share with the audience what we just did the other day? We have ourselves a little bit of a team that we're forming now.
We have a team.
California.
Well, that's kind of cool. Yeah, well, that's sort of a side project. We have been chosen by Mount San Antonio College in Southern California, by one of the professors in their journalism program, which is very cool.
Right.
And shout out to Greg Arias, a friend of the show, friend of ours from the campaign, who is the one who forwarded my name to his journalism professor. But she has now asked our organization to be one of the clients that her advanced PR class takes on as a client in group. So it's a group project, and they all get a different client. And she tries to match people with industries that they're interested in. So we are obviously getting the kids that are interested in like nonprofit and politics. And there's a team of 5 students, and they are putting together a PR plan for us, really focusing on increasing our numbers, our subscribers, and really reaching younger viewers. So I'm excited. You know, basically it's free PR help. So from young people that know how to do all the computer stuff.
And the one thing we should point out to you guys that was brought to our attention the other day, and we can credit our awesome producer, John, for pointing some additional info out as well. We are getting throttled in such a way that would make your head spin. It is so bad that most of our viewers on our show are not even subscribers. So what that tells us is even our subscribers who click the bell, it's still getting support.
And here's the thing. I don't even necessarily care as much about that if somebody regularly watches anyway. Like, for example, I don't like the bell for my subscription. So I just go on every day and I look what's new. Like, I just do, because I don't want that. So I understand that. But everybody, please check and make sure you are subscribed. Definitely share. And yeah, we appreciate the love for sure. You know, we're just trying to transform politics into service, which is what it's supposed to be. And hopefully, you know, spread some good information.
I think we are doing that. And I think tonight was a great show. And to be honest, I think we're starting to get a hang of this in terms of format, feel, consistent message, things like that. Graphics, hey, give it up. Give
graphics,
it up for Jen.
Yay me.
Jen really kicking butt and taking names with that graphics. Hey, you know,
I know.
Made our lives a lot easier.
It has been better.
And it wasn't. And I got to say, not to laud you too much, but at the end of the day, it's not like you are just you are a passable graphic artist. You really do a great job.
Thank you. So, well, you know, and the truth is, though, I should, given the amount of years of training and experience that I've had doing design and graphics. If I didn't do decent, that would be a really waste of a lot of education.
Check out Marianne Williamson's candidate forum. She just did a candidate forum the other day. I believe there's about a dozen or so candidates on there. All friends of the show, people that we support. Obviously, our very own Christine Olivo down here in South Florida, Alexandra Hunt, Jason Call, Michaela Wilkes, super friend.
We're going to get Michaela on. Actually, I need to coordinate with her. I'm supposed to be interviewing her for the Catching Fire endorsement.
Right.
And she's very busy.
We are not going to say when Michaela's coming on, but we will let you know in advance that it will be happening. And like I said, and also very possibly Elijah Manley may be coming on Monday. We are trying to work it out because he is working. We're going to do the best we can to make sure that that happens. And next Thursday, what the hell? We could say who's coming on next Thursday.
Well, and you know what, though? Here's the thing. I kind of want to wait only because next Thursday is also Earth Day.
Right.
And I'm not sure who or what else we might include in our show.
Fair enough.
And so I kind of want to wait and see what all of it pans out before we make any
probably ask maybe
I don't know.
One of the activists or whatever. But yes, we will be involved. There's at least one event that's going on down in Miami.
It's Earth Day.
Yes, it's Earth Day. So there's at least one event down in Miami. We're going to see if we might be able to do something here, you know, perhaps in Fort Lauderdale. We want to do everything we can to make sure that this is as successful as it can be. But the truth is, it's really about what can we do at the county, state, and then, of course, the federal level. Because as much as we celebrate Earth Day, it's all about what policies we are able to put in place that is able to make that change. And we have to continue to get the message out because that's really what it's about.
I mean, and here's the thing. I don't know if there's going to be any necessarily political actions that are going to be happening in Broward that I don't know. And the one that's in Miami is the Funeral for Our Future. It's that one. It's very, very...
The Extinction Rebellion.
It's Extinction Rebellion, guys. And those guys are great. They know how to put on a really good action. They really, you know, they're definitely... And if you want to see, there will definitely be, I'm sure there'll be people being arrested. There always is a crew. So there'll be much fun abound. But I am not sure exactly what I think we want to be doing. I have a few different ideas, but it may or may not be political. It could just be Earth related.
Well, that's true too. I think we could probably do something during the day, but then have an Earth Day themed live stream next Thursday.
Well,
so we'll work on that.
That's what I'm saying. And so anyway, and tomorrow I will be at the Mobile School Pantry tomorrow afternoon from 3 to 6. It's at West Hollywood Elementary School.
Some filming will be going on.
We will be doing some video footage.
Be rolling?
yes. But if anybody is interested in seeing how it works, feel free to come out to Mobile School Pantry. Even if you're not necessarily needed tomorrow, there's always use for help. I mean, it's just a really good organization. So that is where I will be tomorrow afternoon. And I think that's about it.
Sound good?
Yeah, I think we're good.
We really appreciate it, guys. Thank you as always. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you on Monday.
Peace out.
I'm not doing